Good morning, boys and girls, and happy Mother's Day to any mothers who are listening in with their kids this morning. Thank you for joining us. We're glad that you're back this morning. We left you off on a cliffhanger last week with the fact that Hezekiah's people were being persuaded by the king of Assyria to not listen to God. And I said you'd have to come back this week to find out. Now, if you're like me, you probably read ahead. You're like, well, I know where the answer is. But let's look back in 2 Kings chapter 18. We're going to wrap out the end of this chapter. We left off in verse 32. But 33, 34, 35, he kind of just says the same stuff over and over again. Follow me, don't follow God. Verse 36, boys and girls. But the people held their peace and answered him not a word. For the king's commandment was saying, answer him not. Boys and girls, the king had told them, don't answer these men. These men are not here to do what's right. Boys and girls, they didn't speak a word. How hard is that for some of us to not talk? Peter, I guess I've never heard you talk. Good for you. But they didn't speak at all. Boys and girls, that's so hard for us. Sometimes we get in trouble and we want to defend ourselves, and we rightfully are in trouble. Okay, but what if you had done nothing wrong? And boys and girls, they didn't say, I keep repeating it, they didn't even say a word. They didn't try to defend. They kept their mouths shut. So just like Hezekiah had told them to do, they obeyed. Boys and girls, they were following a leader who obeyed, and as they followed that leader who obeyed, they also obeyed. They held their peace. Going into chapter 19, it says, and it came to pass when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord. So he hears what's happened. He hears that King Sennacherib has sent these people to persuade his people. He also hears that Sennacherib's going to demand that money of him that he says he owes him. And King Hezekiah doesn't know what to do about it. So what does he do? Where does he go? That's right, Peter. And he went into the house of the Lord. Boys and girls, when Hezekiah was in trouble, he sought the Lord. He asked God what he should do. His response was to go to the temple. So often, boys and girls, we run to everyone and everything else before we go to God when we're in trouble. Before we go to God and ask for his wisdom. Oftentimes, boys and girls, if we're honest, praying about it's our last resort. We've done everything we can do in our power. We've tried to manipulate, make things work. And then it's like, oh, I should pray about that. But boys and girls, with Hezekiah, that was his first response, was to pray and to go to the house of the Lord. Well, in verse 5, it says, so the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah. So Hezekiah, as he's praying and he's seeking counsel, he sends some men to Isaiah, the man of God. Okay, kind of like if you went to the pastor to ask a question when you're unsure and you're looking for wisdom. Hezekiah's men went to Isaiah. Let's look in verse 6 and see what Isaiah had to say. And Isaiah said unto them, thus shall ye say to your master, thus saith the Lord, be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria had blasphemed me. So he says, don't be afraid. I know the king of Assyria, which we didn't read all the verses, boys and girls, but the king of Assyria was saying, I've defeated this country and that country and this country and that country. And he's saying how powerful he is. And so King Hezekiah is nervous. He's like, yeah, Assyria is powerful. King Sennacherib's powerful. And Isaiah says, the Lord's telling you, don't be afraid. Verse 7, behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and shall return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. So Isaiah is prophesying through what God had told him, and he said, the King Sennacherib, basically he's going to hear a rumor and he's going to feel compelled to go back home. He's going to feel like he really has to go back home. And then when he goes back home, he's going to be smitten by the sword Yeah, thanks, Peter. In other words, he's going to die. Okay, so he says, don't be afraid. God's got this handled. God's going to take care of it. Well, Sennacherib in verses 9 through 13, he sends more messengers to taunt Hezekiah. He gives examples of other kings that he has defeated, and how could Judah and Hezekiah stand up to him. He says, look at how small you are. What do you think, your God's going to help you? And he just keeps taunting him. Verse number 9, and when he heard say of Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, behold, he has come out to fight against thee, he sent messengers again unto Hezekiah, saying, thus shall ye speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, let not thy God, in whom thou trustest, deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. Boys and girls, he was the one doing this deceiving, and he tries to say that God is the deceiver. But boys and girls, Hezekiah, as we've read, trusted God. Hezekiah ran to God when things were wrong. And Hezekiah obeyed God. Hezekiah obeyed God so much that his people followed in his example and obeyed, even when it was difficult. Doing right can be very difficult, boys and girls. Sometimes people make fun of us for doing right. But we should still do what's right, no matter what other people think, because God's opinion of us, in other words, what God thinks about our character, is far more important than what other people think. Boys and girls, we're going to keep carrying on with this story, and we've got to find out if King Sennacherib, which you probably know by now, what's going to happen to him, although it was prophesied, and find out what's going to happen with the nation of Judah when King Sennacherib goes to attack.